What's going on, everybody? We have got a great show for you today. Some might call it a rad show. In the show, we're going to talk about a bunch of things, but we're going to try to condense it all within 30 minutes. We're going to start with some games that I've recently been playing. We're going to move into some games that are on their way in the mail to me and what might be coming up soon. We'll also talk about just my thoughts in general about how technology through apps, for example, are now being included into board games and how that might impact the future. And the last thing we'll talk about is just the future of this channel. But most importantly, you're going to want to stay through the end because we have got a great opportunity to give away some free board games. We have got a handful of them. We've got Codenames that's going away, Carcassonne, Pandemic the Cure, Warhammer Quest, and one of our family favorites, King of Tokyo, including the power-up expansion. You're going to want to hear how you can get those. Stay tuned to the very end. But for now, let's dive into the intro. Thanks. And welcome back. This is the Rad Chad Show. Hey, we've got a jam-packed schedule as I mentioned before, so let's dive right into it. Been playing a lot of games recently. Some good, some not so much. The first one that I wanted to talk about is First Martians. I pre-ordered the game, was very hyped for it. I absolutely love cooperative games, and more importantly than that is The Martian is easily in my top 3 favorite books of all time. And so really between the theme of First Martians and the fact that it was a cooperative game coming from a great designer with some heritage with Robinson Crusoe that is in the top 25, I think, of the BGG's best games, I had high expectations. And unfortunately for me and the rest of our gaming group, the game just fell flat. It really started as a slippery slope from the very beginning. You open up the box and you lay out the components on the table, and just the visual appeal of the game lacks flair. And I understand that Mars is a lifeless planet, but in The Martian, which has no visual appeal, it's all text, I at least felt the theme come through with the writing and the dialogue. And even though Mark Watney is only one person on a planet, I felt like I was there and it was exciting and enticing. And at least when it comes to a board game, you have got the physical component sitting in front of you to help you build that thematic element of the game. And I just felt with all these panels and switches and farms and backup generators and whatever the heck else that the game has to it, it just looked dull and uninteresting. And going back to how I really feel about it, it just looked lifeless. And this included the visual aesthetics of the app, which were fairly bare bones. I mean, it lacked substance to the app. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And it's probably the primary reason why in the third segment of this video, I really want to dive into how technology is being embedded into board games these days and how it can be done well and in other areas where it wasn't done well. So, here's the deal. Every game can be good looking, it can be bad looking, but none of that really matters if the meat on the game's bones are substantial and there's a good, solid game underneath with, great mechanics. And I just felt like First Martians, while an okay game, it just didn't hit the home run for us that we were really anticipating. And a few reasons why are, for example, I really did not enjoy Arkham Horror despite wanting to love that game. And I felt like I wanted to love this game as well. I mean, I've got all the biases in place with my love for The Martian, my love for cooperative games, for example. But in the case of Arkham Horror, which also was a very thematic cooperative game, I just felt like I was spending more time playing for the game than I was doing my own actions, reading my own stories, and all of that fun jazz, right? In First Martians, you've got, if I remember correctly, about 7 different phases that you need to walk through from top to bottom. And some of those phases are simple. You might have a production phase, or you might have a morale phase, or you might have a malfunction phase, right? And even though a few of these only take a few seconds, a lot of them have got sub-phases within main phases. So let's take, for example, the production phase. during the production phase, you're on Mars, right? So you have to check your oxygenators, or you have to check your solar panels. You have to make sure that those things are providing you the supplies and the raw goods that you need in the form of, in this case, oxygen and energy, to supply those to the rest of your facilities and make sure that they're still running. You can't go to the medical bay, for example, if it has no oxygen in it, right? So you have to have these things. And it was all a little bit fiddly. And at the end of the day, we just felt like we were playing more for the board than we were for ourselves. Now let's come back to the Arkham Horror reference, because Arkham Horror had what is more or less a second edition, a second version of that game, which was Eldritch Horror. And I happened to have a chance to play Eldritch Horror again with my best friend just the other day. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But in First Martians, each turn that you have 2 pawns. And you can either spend those pawns together to more or less guarantee that your action is going to be successful, or you can split them up and you can spend your actions separately, in which case you might have to roll dice to see if you were actually successful, if maybe something bad happens, like, I don't know, the airlock burst and you got shot off into space, and just a whole bunch of other typically bad things will occur if you decide to basically rush your efforts and split your actions into 2. But even still, what I'm getting at here is that the game, at least the introductory scenario, plays out over the course of 7 days. You could complete the game sooner than that, like we did. We completed the game in 5 days. So the maximum amount of actions, at least in our scenario, was you could possibly do 10 actions if you split all 5 days worth of actions in half. And I guess what I'm getting at is 10 actions for what was an hour game just didn't feel like I was doing enough to make an impact on how our performance was within the game, even though I felt it was a pretty easy game and we ended up winning. So let's go back to Arkham Horror. The reason why I didn't enjoy that game is because there was a lot of fiddly rules, and I felt like I was playing more for the game than I was doing my own actions. And so Eldritch Horror came out, and I think it really streamlined and cut back on the amount of upkeep that you needed to do for the board in between turns, and it also made it a very simplified layout. You do this, then this, then this. It was clean, it was simple, it was elegant, it was nice. I really enjoy Eldritch Horror. And then you even have an extension of that, which was Mansions of Madness, and in specific, I'm talking about the second edition. So my final comparison here is that I really genuinely thought that The Martian, I love Mansions of Madness second edition, by the way. I thought that The Martian, with its app element, was going to, I guess, streamline Robinson Crusoe, which a lot of people thought was a very complex game, not necessarily in a bad way, but originally the rules were very poorly written. A lot of people complained about them, and I held off because of that. I didn't want to have a repeat of an Arkham Horror type scenario. So when they announced that The Martian's going to have an app in it, I thought, this is beautiful. It's going to be like Mansions of Madness. That app is going to do so much for you. It's going to tell a great story. This is going to be a great game. And so I took the plunge. I pre-ordered it. Guys, I never pre-order stuff. I almost never kickstart stuff, which is basically a form of pre-ordering. And so I went against that because I just felt that confident in this game. But that app does almost nothing for you in First Martians. I think when we talk about in this third section about apps, it really needs to be an integral component. And in the First Martians, spoiler warning, it wasn't, whereas in Mansions of Madness second edition, it is. But more on that later. So my overall impressions of First Martians, it's not that the game was terrible. I think a lot of people are really going to enjoy this game. I mean, Robinson Crusoe was loved. It's, like I said, number 25 or so on the top 100 for BGG. I think this harkens back to that pretty heavily, and a lot of people are going to love it. We just unfortunately felt like it didn't live up to at least our expectations. Maybe they're inflated. Maybe we didn't play the game enough. But that was for First Martians. The second game that I got a chance to play was I played Eldritch Horror, which I know isn't nothing new, or yes, it is interesting, but it's nothing new. But my best friend and I, we really enjoy aliens, as you can see in the background. And so one of our favorite things to say is, we're all going to die, man. We're all going to die. And one of the best things to die by is Cthulhu. So the last time we played the game, we played Cthulhu, and I had put in several of the easier Mythos cards. And we didn't beat Cthulhu in the end, but we got to a very down to the wire battle against, in this case, the final boss, Cthulhu. And it was a great, epic game. We had an absolute blast. So we wanted to bring it back to the table. And this time we played against, this would be, the second or third little mini expansion. I think it was Strange Remnants, where they added Syzygy, and I could be totally mispronouncing that name, so I apologize for that if I am. I was under the impression that this was a quicker, epic, what are they called? Great Old One. Ancient one. And so we set up the Doom track, and it seemed to be shorter, and it's one of those ancient ones where if the Doom track hits the very end, kind of like in Pandemic, for example, the game just immediately ends. If that deck runs out, you got too many outbreaks, crap hits the fan too much, boom, game's over. And I like that because then it gives you a time element where, listen, here is your deadline. If you do not complete this by this time, it's over. Game over, man, right? So I like that, but I guess just bad luck really hit us from the get-go. We had a monster, for example, that said, every time there's a reckoning effect, roll a die, and I think it was a 1 or 2. You need to increase Doom by 1. We had a Mythos card that increased the Doom. We had a couple of the gates that came out that had the exact same symbol. That symbol was the blue one that comes up twice on that Omen track. So really that Doom track was just flying by. Now, despite that, my best friend was rocking and rolling. I mean, this guy just had everything going his way. He had spells coming up the wazoo. You need a ton of spells because Syzygy, you got to create this kind of force field barrier to block Syzygy out. And that was very thematic and interesting and cool. Me, on the other hand, and don't get me wrong, I don't think that dice hate me, but oh my gosh, I could not roll a success to save my life. And we've got those lovely dice, the custom ones where the 5 and the 6, which would be the successes in this case, have the Elder Sign logo on them, and they're from Fantasy Flight. They look great. They're very thematic. I absolutely love that little touch to the game. But man, I swear I couldn't roll a single 5 or 6 to save my life. So it was actually funny. My character died. He went insane on the I think it was before the first turn, because the Mythos phase comes at the very end of a turn, and I'm pretty sure I lost all of my sanity during that Mythos phase. So my first character was totally gone insane, bonkers. He lost his mind. He was gone within the first round, and that just really set the stage for how the rest of the game was going to go for him. And interestingly enough, I mean, we got pretty doggone close to beating the boss, despite the fact that the odds were just really felt stacked against us the whole time. And I think if we had had one more turn, we probably could have won. And it's interesting. So I let my best friend choose which ancient one we were going to play against, and he chose Syzygy. I think it was more or less random. I've got the new expansion, and I'm very excited to try Cities of Ruin. And I didn't have a great experience with Eldritch Horror, obviously, because the luck was not on my side this time. But I know how much fun this game can be. I've played it quite a few times. And I'm very excited to get Cities of Ruin back out there. I think it will give it almost like a Legacy-esque feel to it, with the fact that in the Cities of Ruin expansion, you can have full-fledged cities like London or New York or what have you, in this case it would be Arkham, just flat out destroyed for whatever apocalyptic reason. And I think that's a cool little twist and element that game could deliver for us. So anyways, that was Eldritch Horror. Love that game. If you haven't played it yet, highly recommend it. And yeah. So the final thing that I want to talk about with just games that I've been playing recently is small box games. And part of this is news, because John Cloudis, which let me preface this by saying he's the designer of small box games, and Omen, A Reign of War is my number one favorite game of all time, bar none. The only thing that's even remotely close is Legendary Encounters, because I'm a diehard Aliens fan, right? And so anyways, John Cloudis was recently hired, and it sounds like full-time, by a new startup studio where the guy who I guess created Indie Boards and Cards, which would be, like The Resistance, for example, that guy had gone and created a new publisher. And as one of his first designers, he signed up John Cloudis. And they're going to take his back catalog of games, which he's got some pretty doggone good games, Omen: A Reign of War being one of them, Hemlock being another very notable game, or another one of my favorites is Neolithic. And it sounds like that they're going to take some of those games, they might revamp the rules, they might revamp the production quality. I think that this is a great opportunity because I've been long saying that Omen: A Reign of War is the perfect game. Now it's hard to find, but it is the perfect game for people who are diehard Magic the Gathering fans. And if you want Magic the Gathering like I do, but you don't want a deck build, or you don't want to put in the time sink or the money sink into really being good, or even keeping up with all of the cards in the game because of how many releases it comes out with. Omen: A Reign of War is just one deck, right? Shuffle it. Here's a few cards for you, a few cards for me. Maybe you do a draft, but it's simple. It's straightforward, man. You can get right into it, and it's got a lot of depth to it. It's got a lot of that comboing that Magic the Gathering has, and I love it. Absolutely love it. So, Small Box Games, for their 10-year anniversary, they released, basically it was a 3-pack on Kickstarter. And he's one of the few guys, along with David Serlin, because I enjoy pretty much every single one of his games. He's probably the only person that it's a guarantee that I'm going to kickstart his games. Those two, I don't really kickstart much else outside of those guys, but when those guys have a Kickstarter, hey, sign me up, right? So, first of all, as far as his Kickstarters go, the guy is always on time. His games, hence the name Small Box Games, are small, they're inexpensive. So really, unlike First Martians, which was an $85 investment, in the case of Small Box Games, they're $15, $20, maybe $25 games. So really, if they don't turn out to be phenomenal games, it's not that big of a deal. You didn't lose that much money. But I got these 3 games in, one of which I'm going to call it is a spin-off of Hemlock in a much smaller form. You've got a 4-player game called Saidamyo, at least I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And then the last one, which I'm going to butcher as well, is Cartouche Dynasties. And that's what my wife and I were playing, and the game in specific that I want to talk about. It's an interesting game. It really reminds me of 2 things. It's got a very Neolithic element to it, where there are specific decks more or less set out in a middle row, and in worker placement fashion, you have to assign cards, or in this case, there's a selection of gods, so there's 4 gods, and you choose one of those gods and you place it on one of these decks like a worker placement game. That god then gives you some sort of special ability, which might allow you to manipulate that deck to draw cards, for example, or it might allow you to play cards that you've drawn out of your hand and into your tableau. It's a very Neolithic-esque element to the game that I enjoy, but the gods that are out there, there's 6 of them, and you only choose 4 for each round. They don't have that big of a variance to each one, at least not in my opinion. They all felt more or less very similar. Now, they have their variations, right? But they just weren't like, oh man, I absolutely need this one this turn, or oh man, you got that one. Oh, I really needed that. So I think there was a missed opportunity there. Not bad per se, just a missed opportunity. So it reminded me of Neolithic. The other thing that it really reminded me of, and even though it's not a deck builder, what is the game where there's a pyramid shape? Doggone it, I can't believe I can't remember this, especially right on the spot. So it's a deck builder, and there's a little pyramid that you build out of cards. And you can buy cards from within this pyramid. And when you buy a card from the pyramid kind of crumbles at the end of your turn. And that's not necessarily what this game reminded me of, but in that game, there's this cool little element where cards within your hand can be entombed, basically. So you take them out of your deck. It's more of a way to cull your deck, which makes your deck better in some cases, but they've incentivized you to not just get rid of the crappy cards, which most deck builders like Dominion or Ascension do. You just want to get rid of your crappy cards so that you only draw your good cards. In this game in specific, you want to entomb some cards, which could be your crappy cards. It could cull your deck, but some of the better cards have really high point values. And if you entomb them, then you get those high point values, but only if you entomb them. It was a very neat mechanic where you always had a minute decision albeit a very important minute decision of, do I entomb this card or not? And I apologize that I can't think of the name of this game. I should know it, but I'm just brain farting right now. And going back to Cartouche Dynasty, it's got almost an identical mechanic to it. So basically, when you're drawing these cards from the decks that you place your workers out in, you can play these cards in a handful of ways. So you can put them out in your tableau, you can put them over into your tomb, as I'll call it, right? And then there's different ways that you can get points. And so there are multiple paths to victory, but I think my final complaint about the game would be that no one path necessarily felt better than another path to victory, and that would normally be a good thing. But I think in this case, I guess from the very beginning, I just felt like there was a lack of direction, like I didn't know necessarily what I wanted to do or how I wanted to do it. So that was Cartouche Dynasties. I felt it was a good, albeit not great game, but definitely check out Small Box Games because they have a lot of good things to offer, and who knows, there might even be more moving forward in the future with their new gig. So those are the games that I've played recently, but we've got quite a few that are either on my shelf right now waiting to be hit the table or that are in the mail. And I'm looking forward to a whole bunch of games, especially with Gen Con right around the corner. The one that I'm probably most looking forward to is, if anybody has seen it recently, the Dice Tower on Miami Dice. Sam, Z, and Tom all gave pretty much glowing remarks to Dice Forge, and I am a huge fan of this designer's previous works. Seasons is one of the first games that really scratched that Magic the Gathering itch for me. Now it's got a whole bunch of other great things about that game with the dice, the resource management, you name it, but it was the card comboing in specific that really made me fall in love with it. His follow-up to that, Lords of Zidit, which was in the same universe. We love programmable games, and that was just the second home run back-to-back. So now he's batting 2 for 2 with me, and I'm thinking I'm always looking for a game with a nice little niche to it. And this whole idea of dice customization where you can pop out the face of a die and insert another one into it to manipulate that dice and make it unique to you, I find it just a very cool mechanic that I hope, you know, it's been done before, but I hope Dice Forge is really the first one that just knocks it out of the ballpark and does it really well. So very much looking forward to Dice Forge. As many of you know, the spiel was recently announced, and I was a few dollars shy of hitting the free shipping for a recent online order for board games. So I decided to take the 10 or 12 bucks, whatever it was, to buy Kingdomino. It's got the potential, even though I can't say I'm too tremendously interested in it. I think it looks very simplistic, but it's got the potential to be a fairly good husband and wife game. And I'm here to tell you I have been seriously wrong about a lot of games that I thought were going to be too simple. And a great example for that is Onirim, or Onirim, however you want to pronounce it, which has skyrocketed into both my wife and I's top 10 favorite games of all time, period. The second edition of that, or the revised edition, absolutely love it. I couldn't have been any more wrong with what I thought was going to be a definitive kind of review of the game. I thought in my mind before I even bought that game, I knew what it was going to be like, and I was just blown away. So who knows, maybe Kingdomino will be the same effect. I don't have any negative feelings for it per se. I just don't know if it's going to be a slam dunk. So we'll see about Kingdomino. I didn't play either of Ryan Laukatt's previous games, so that would be Above and Below and Islebound. They were both gorgeous. They both have that storytelling aspect to it. If you haven't noticed already, I'm a huge sucker for that type of a game. If you look at Eldritch Horror, if you look at Mansions of Madness, those are just two examples. So Near and Far, I think, has got all of the things in place that I want out of a board game with the storytelling and the beautiful artwork, but it's also got a really, what appears to be strong mechanics as a framework for the game. I watched Rodney Smith's tutorial video as well as his gameplay series. They're great. Check them out. And I think that one's got some seriously good potential as well. So who knows? We'll see on that one. Anyways, let's move on to the third aspect of this podcast, and then we'll talk about how you can win some of these free board games here as soon as we're done. But the thing that I want to talk about, and it's most important that I get your opinion on this. You know, if there's one plug that I can make is, like, really honestly, put your feedback down in the section below where, you know, you can add a comment or go to a Facebook or Twitter page and just shoot me a little comment that says, hey, yeah, here's how I feel about it. Because I'm really interested to know what other people feel about technology and apps in specific within board games. It's a super controversial topic right now, and for me personally, I don't necessarily understand why. I think while I've read quite a few comments about, well, hey, for example, I can pull out my 1970s copy of Acquire, which, by the way, is the game that got me into the hobby. Absolutely love that game. I can pull out my copy from 1970s. My iPad is outdated within 2 years, or my phone is outdated within a single year, right? You can't do that with a copy of, let's say, Mansions of Madness 2nd edition 10 years from now. And I can understand that. And that's why the controversy surrounds legacy games as well. Like Pandemic Legacy is now the #1 game on BGG's Top 100. I personally didn't like that game, not necessarily because of the legacy elements, but people legitimately don't like that game, or like the Exit series, which just won the Kennerspiel, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, because, hey, I can use it once and then I have to move on. I got to throw it away. I literally can't ever use it again. And people have that criticism about apps and technology in games, and I think that's the one area where I really do respect, and I can understand that. I guess for me, and this is the case with a lot of people, like legacy games, here's the deal. As long as I get the bang for my buck, I'm thrilled, I'm happy. And if it's a great game, then the more the merrier, right? Let's do it. So Mansions of Madness 2nd edition, for me personally, was the perfect example of that. I didn't enjoy Arkham Horror because of all the rules that I felt I overlooked while playing that game, and how much I actually played for the game and not for myself. And Mansions of Madness had a very streamlined, here's the round sequence, click this button when you're done with this round, here's a story blurb that will generate for you, hey, if you want to interact with this token, here's how you do that. Hey, if you want to interact with a monster, click here. Like, it very much streamlined that game and took all of this stuff that I don't necessarily want to be doing myself and just embedded it into a computer system. And, there's a thing about board games where it's tactile. I talked about this earlier. And so people want to roll dice, they want to read cards, they want to shuffle decks, they want to feel the board, they want to look at artwork. And I respect and I understand that. They also want to be in a social environment where it's, me and another person sitting at a table together. And there's a difference between that and, let's say, playing online, Xbox Live, through the internet, and I'm just talking to you with a headset, or definitely a big difference between me just interacting with a video game by myself, right? And I also respect that. I feel like if an app is an integral component of a game, and you can go to too far of an extreme where, you're no longer even a board game, you're just an app, right? I'm just talking about kind of like that sweet spot where you definitely still need the board and you also need this app. I think if you can marry those two together, a computer can be a wonderful thing to help you improve your board game. Now, that being said, while I felt Mansions of Madness did that, and it improved not only the rules and the mechanics of the game, but it also really fleshed out the thematic story elements of that game. I felt like in First Martians, which is the flip side, it was not integral at all. And an example is that app really only did two things for you. It generated an event deck and it generated an adventure deck. So an event pops up every turn, and it literally could be as simple as saying, such and such an item is broken, right? Switch it from a green cube to a red cube. And it's just a little one-sentence blurb. There's no story per se, at least for the standalone mission that we played, to speak of. And so I thought that was a missed opportunity. And then when you do decide to split those actions up and you have to possibly go do an adventure after you roll your dice, well, you go to the app and you see what that adventure was. But it also, like the event decks, like nothing really just wowed me as far as, oh, that's interesting, right? It's not like some sort of hurricane was sweeping across Mars, right? Like some sort of wicked sandstorm or dust storm was, swirling across, and next thing you know, all this hard clay ripped through our hub, and the rover was broken because it got impaled by some sort of giant stone, right? Like there wasn't anything that thematic or interesting to these little event and adventures. And so I just felt like, well, hey, you've got this malfunction deck, which I'll talk about in just a second. Why don't you just add the event and the adventure decks in there as well, especially if they're so bare bones? So it just felt lackluster to me. And I also felt like it could have done more. It wasn't integral. So that malfunction deck, for example, is sort of like in Pandemic when you have 3 virus cubes on a city and another virus cube needs to be placed there. Well, it can't, right? So you have an outbreak and all the regions surrounding it, they all get infected too. And that's the repercussion for you not taking action in that specific location. Well, in this case, like certain systems like the living block can deteriorate. And if you don't handle that situation, it can really escalate, and then you have a malfunction, which basically means that you flip over a card and something really, really bad happens, okay? I felt like, well, hey, if you've got the event in the adventure decks, why not add this in there as well? Or in the production phase, for example, and I know this would be much harder to include within the game, but why doesn't it keep track of how much energy and how much food and how much oxygen that I'm producing and how many systems that I need to feed those things to in order to maintain my overall hub? I just felt like what was there in terms of an app was, again, bare bones and unnecessary. And so the dilemma is, how far do you push the boundaries, right? Because you don't want to go too far and make it basically a computer game and no longer a board game. But at the same time, you want to make it important enough to where you don't feel like, hey, this could have easily been removed. So that's just how I personally feel about apps or technology within board games. I think that really the future is bright for this, and I can't wait to see what other games start implementing it and how they do it. But I really want to hear your take. So let me know down in the comments below, or shoot me a comment or even a message on Facebook, Twitter, or even BoardGameGeek, and let me know what you think about technology and apps within board games. Okay, so last but not least, I want to talk to you guys about how you can win some free board games. We have got 5 that I'm going to be giving away. And again, to recap, those include King of Tokyo, including the power-up expansion. We've got Carcassonne, we've got Pandemic the Cure, Warhammer Quest, and Codenames, the original version. And so basically the way that it's going to work is every time we get to 100 subscribers on the YouTube channel, I'm going to randomly select one of those people. I'm going to reach out to you guys, ask you which of the 5 board games you would like. And I'll even pick up the shipping charges, provided you're not all the way out in the Bermuda Triangle and lost in time and space somewhere where shipping is $1 million bajillion dollars or just flat out not possible. So provided that condition isn't actually the case, you'll not only get the free board game, but it will be shipped to you for free as well, and it will be your board game of choice. So we'll do that once we get to the first 100 subscribers. Then we'll do it again once we get to 200, 300, 400, and finally 500 subscribers. So 5 board games, 5 chances to win one of those 5 board games. And the beautiful thing is if you're one of those first 100 subscribers, you are entered into all 5 opportunities to win the board games. So even though the pool gets larger and larger, therefore the chances of winning get smaller and smaller, you're still eligible up to 5 times. So it should be a great opportunity for me just to say thank you for being one of those early adopters to the channel. So if you really enjoyed some of the content that you've seen already, be it this podcast, or definitely go check out some of the funny skits that we've done, please click that subscribe button for 2 reasons. Number 1, obviously you will get notifications automatically for anytime we create a new video, which should be weekly. We'll do weekly podcasts. Hopefully we'll even do weekly funny skits, and there'll also be reviews and even tutorials of board games. And then the second thing is you will be entered in to get a free board game. But an ulterior motive for me is my wife has said, hey, once you get to 500 subscribers, we'll go ahead and get you a absolutely disgusting in a good way neon The Rad Chad Show sign that we'll put somewhere up here in the studio. So that's just kind of our own little internal competition that, hey, we want to achieve 500 subscribers, which is what my old YouTube channel had. We want to meet that again. And as soon as we do, we'll reward ourselves a little bit and just get a nice sign. That'll be very cool for both us and you guys. So anyways, thank you for watching, and let's cue the outro.
Thank you for watching The Rad Chad Show. Till next time.